Tonight is the 10th of March, 2026. It's now 7:29 p.m. Daylight Savings Time, 6:29 Standard Time. This is only a 0.2 second, or roughly a 6-inch scope observation of what I'm hoping to catch tonight before I get started on the NGC2500 to 2549 et al. Is 2288. It's a galaxy group, 2888, 89, 90, and 94. That was very fetching to me and interesting. And so what I'm going to do once I can run up to 5 seconds exposure time, this is 0.2. After this exposure time, there's not enough stars to stack for whatever reason. I guess the background sky is over bright. But anyway, what I'm going to do as soon as I can get up to a 5-second exposure time, because these studies are rather quickly going to be exiting stage west, I hope to capture them all and maybe add some data from Steve Gottlieb's adventuresindeepspace.com. And what I may do is step through various exposure times on it so we can see how it progresses as you capture more stacks as well as more longer exposure time. So we're about 1 minute and 30 seconds into this introduction. I'm going to wait I would say about a half an hour till 8 o'clock. Hopefully things will not be blocked by roof tries, and I will be able to get some rather attractive views of the NGC, I believe it's 2289 galaxy group, and I may be mistaken. It could be the 88. So let's hold off for the next 15 minutes to a half an hour and see what we can see. Okay, I just did a synchronization on Betelgeuse to make sure we landed where we needed to land, and we went further north. Scope is getting dangerously close to seeing a roof try. I'm going to give you some data on NGC 2288. I don't think it is the brightest of the galaxies. It's just one of the members. And then we're going to progress from there. So not a bad star field. Focus looks pretty good, but this is only a 30x view. Lots of stacks, 59. You can always tell that because there's a dark bar that progresses from the south, that builds from the south, which basically, as far as I can tell, means we're slightly off on our declination axis. Now, Penty, the observatory, does not look directly towards the North Pole. I have to guesstimate and just keep making small adjustments to fix this issue over time. But anyway, there are some thick clouds approaching from the west. I don't know if they'll dissipate over the valley or not. But what I really want to do tonight is get these northy galaxies down, including this 22, 88, 89, 90, 94 series. So what we're seeing here is a 0.2 second exposure of NGC 2288 in particular, which will include the other galaxies in the field of view. It's a galaxy in Gemini. Now, it's magnitude 14.4, which means photographic. It's probably very small, 0.2 by 0.2 arc-minute elliptical, 226 million light years distant. This is probably a 25,000 light year in diameter galaxy, roughly speaking. But this is where we're going to start. And we're at right ascension, 6 hours, 50 minutes, 51 seconds, and we're fast losing that in terms of approaching the middle of the sky. We're at plus 33 degrees, 27 minutes, 44 seconds. So this is approaching culmination, I would estimate, within 5 degrees. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through the exposure times. Even though there's still some color in the sky, we have not entered sky dark. Okay, this is the 0.2 or 6-inch scope equivalent exposure time with a massive number of stacks, 105. Okay, we've now gone on to a 0.5 second exposure. The 0.2 was roughly equivalent to a 6-inch scope, which is the aperture of Quattro f4 Newtonian, with a 40% central obstruction. This is calculated to be 10.5, and it maps up really good against visual eyepiece observations that Steve Gottlieb reports on adventuresindeepspace.com. And he doesn't use a 10-inch scope. He's used an 8 and he's used a 13.1. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start zooming in because possibly we will see some galaxies in this series. Now I am seeing a faint fuzzy right up there. So let's continue and search around a little bit. This may be our galaxy series here because I remember there were a number of them all in the same basic region of space. I am not going to play with the histogram because once you do that, then you lose the ability for it to really accurately track from one study to the next, although I do change the exposure brightness when I actually get into Movie Maker in case there's any kind of difficulties. I do believe with a 10.5-inch scope that we are seeing 1, 2, 3, possibly 4 galaxies in the NGC22, probably the 89 series. Let me go on from here and go up to a 1-second exposure, which I believe is somewhere around 13.5-inch eyepiece equivalent. Okay, we're now on to a 1-second exposure time. And every doubling of exposure time basically adds about 0.8 magnitudes to your reach and pretty much adds 50% of the previous aperture equivalency to the scope. Okay, I do believe we are seeing the galaxies in this region here. We've got 13 stacks, so I'm going to proceed up. Now, we're getting lots of stacks primarily because we've got short exposures. I'm going to proceed to 2-second exposure time now. Another thing you need to be aware of is that usually I start as soon as we get to 30x 20% e-zoom view, which means a single stack, then it goes on from there. Basically, however, we have to push the magnification up to about 100% to fully utilize the aperture of the scope, which is revealing itself now with a 2-second exposure, and roughly a 2-second exposure is a 18-inch scope. So this is equivalent to what Steve Gottlieb observes through his 17.5-inch, probably a Dobsonian scope that he uses primarily from wherever he observes. I believe it's in somewhere in Northern California. Although he may have been a member of the club that I was once a member of on the coast in California, Santa Cruz Astronomy Club, because they had a 13.1-inch scope and they also had it as a binocular 13.1-inch scope, so that's quite amazing. All right, I'm going to move on now to a 5-second exposure, and I'm going to give you some details on some of the other galaxies. Our next galaxy in this group is NGC2289. It's brighter and larger. It's magnitude 13.2, lenticular spiral 1.1 by 0.6 arc minutes in size. We're definitely beginning to see auras around just about all the galaxies. We may have seen them at the previous exposure time as well. 70% e-zoom gives the best balance of depth, image depth, as well as the sharpness of the stars. That's about 105x. So we're now looking through what I would consider to be a 30-inch scope at 105x, which ordinarily you wouldn't be able to do because its exit pupil would probably be too large for your eyes. However, we want to keep the magnification lower than 150x or lower, simply because the stars start to bloat out too much. So there are 13 stacks at 5-second exposure, 30-inch equivalent eyepiece, and there is a scope in California near San Juan Bautista on Fremont Peak that's a public observatory that you can register to participate in. At least you could back when I lived in that area. Okay, another galaxy in this group is 2290. And NGC 2290 is a 13.2 magnitude, 1.2 by 0.7 arc minute spiral of the lowercase a class, which means relatively close to lenticular, fairly mature galaxy. It is 229 million light years distant at hour 6:50:56, with a declination up north of plus 33 degrees, 26 minutes and 15 seconds. This is a 10-second exposure, which doubles the 30, so we're about a 45-inch equivalent view. I'm going to push the magnification up once again to our 105x view. Now, I haven't recentered the scope. I'm just continuing to capture stacks every iteration. And I have to start restack every time I change the exposure time using the ASI software. Now, if we go to 100% e-zoom, now we're capturing all the light feasible. There's a very large, faint, relatively coreless galaxy down here to the north and the west, which was probably earlier than 2288. Then we have these four galaxies here, and if you look around, you'll see some other faint fuzzies at various locations. And I'm going to go ahead now and go for a 30-second exposure. We've now had 9 stacks at 10 seconds, 45-inch relative aperture. This is our first stack at 30 seconds exposure. And it's not a doubling, but it's a 3 times increase in the light gathering capacity, which adds about 1.1 to 1.2 magnitudes to image depth. Doesn't quite double the aperture from 45 to 90, but adds a little bit to it, maybe 75-inch equivalent aperture. That would be at the eyepiece, of course. If you had a 75-inch scope, you wouldn't be using one of these ZWO imagers. You'd have to have a monster CCD plate on it to capture the image of the sky. In this case, I think it's 15 millimeters by 15 millimeters with a 0.8 quantum efficiency. This is a very decent view of the galaxies. This one's very intriguing, and I'll have to go on Steve Gottlieb and see what its designation is. The galaxy over here is kind of edgy on. You can see that. There's also some oblateness here. This one looks more or less circular, and this one looks edgy on. And I bet you if you went around counting galaxies, you discover quite a few more. I'm going to back off to our best views, balanced view of depth and image quality at 105x. Now, what I have pretty much figured out is every time you add 1.5 magnitudes to your image reach, you'll actually get 4 times as many galaxies. And I ran a test on it recently in which it pretty much pegged out. So every time you double your aperture, you could see 4 times as many galaxies. So imagine you have a 6-inch scope, you can see 100 galaxies. You go to a 12-inch scope, now you've got 400 galaxies available to you. Then you go to a 24, and you got 2,400 galaxies available. It's a rough estimate, but that's basically the math. Let's try a 60-second exposure now on this NGC2289 group of galaxies in Gemini. Okay, we're not quite at the 60-second exposure time. I want that one to pop, so you'll see it on the screen. But as we're waiting, I'll give you the data. NGC2294 is the last galaxy in this 5-galaxy group. I do believe we just captured the first pass. It's magnitude 13.8, 0.8 by 0.4, arc minute elliptical class 6. And let's go up to our 50% e-zoom or 75x view. Have a look. It's an elliptical class 6, 230 million light years distance. Right ascension is 6 hours, 51 minutes, 11 seconds with a declination of plus 33 degrees, 31 minutes, 36 seconds. Okay, so I'm not going to push it beyond this because it is now entering sky dark and we're soon going to get blockage of the scope, and I have to move on to the series of studies tonight. And this series of studies tonight is going to emphasize 10 to 12 galaxies that are all further north than 25 degrees north latitude, so I can weave them into the 2500 to 2599 series at a later time, should the clouds encroach. Anyway, we've now had a couple of stacks at 1 minute exposure times. We're getting some pretty solid views. We're not getting too much distension in stars. Let's push it up first to our 150x view to capture all our photons. And like I said, this is equivalent of about, let's see, we went from about 70, it's the equivalent of about a 90 or 94-inch scope at this point. galaxies are all pronounced. They all have significant auras around them, and they are pretty good views. They're nearly overhead on the zenith. And with that, backing out to our grandest view, I am going to say, Carpe Noctem.